Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, just how dominant has the Timberwolves defense been over the past month plus? Break that down on the show today. Plus, NBA power rankings, NBA front office rankings, and the Timberwolves' tough schedule, both to this point and also over the next few weeks. It's kind of crazy how hard it is. It's all coming on the show. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is sponsored by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Happy Wednesday, everybody. Happy hump day. We are one day closer, one day away from the Timberwolves finally being back in action once again. Second straight week with a long layoff of 3+ days. So excited to see Wolves Knicks Thursday night. We'll talk about that on tomorrow's show. Actually working towards setting up hopefully a crossover episode with Locked On Knicks to break down that matchup. Talk about Cat, talk about DiVincenzo, talk about Randle. That's tomorrow. Today, I want to spend some time talking about just how dominant the Timberwolves defense has been. We know it's been good recently, but how dominant over the past, call it 6 weeks or so, has the Timberwolves defense actually been? So I want to dig in on that. And then I want to get into NBA power rankings at NBA.com. We'll talk about NBA front office rankings that The Athletic released at the end of last week. And then close with reflecting on just how tough the Timberwolves schedule has been. A really interesting kind of weird stat that I noticed looking through the Wolves schedule and the NBA standings, and then also what's upcoming, because the next few weeks don't get any easier for the Wolves. So we'll talk about all that last segment here today. First, though, a big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you'd like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. A reminder about the Locked On Wolves newsletter. You can subscribe at LockedOnDaily.com. It's one stop for ultimate team and league coverage delivered right to your inbox. Sign up for free right now at LockedOnDaily.com. Again, LockedOnDaily.com. Start your day with the all-new free Locked On Wolves newsletter. All right. Let's start by talking about the Timberwolves defense. So yesterday's show, if you listened to Tuesday's show, I spent a good chunk of the show talking about how similar basically the four factors, all the peripheral stuff is for the Wolves defense to date this year compared to last year, and the offense. What's most drastically different? And the answer is the free throw rate on both ends of the floor, and also the Wolves are just not making enough shots offensively. They're generating the right shots, and everything else kind of looks the same. The turnover rate, the rebounding rate on both ends of the floor, basically the same as last year. Not to say they can't improve, especially their offensive turnover rate, right? But eerily similar. All that to say, the Timberwolves have been straight up dominant for the past month plus. The date I've been using is November 18th. And I think I think that's the most fair date to start with, because November 18th gets us all the way back to right before the Timberwolves 4-game losing streak. Remember, they lost the bad loss at Toronto, the close loss at Boston, the overtime loss to Houston, and then the 11-point loss to Sacramento, which I think is actually their biggest, second largest loss this year, besides that debacle the first game in Portland. So not quite as bad as the shorthanded Miami and the double Portland losses, but they lost 4 in a row. That was part of that greater 7 losses in out of 9 games stretch. So my November 18th date includes those 4 games. And the numbers I mentioned yesterday were the Wolves have been, number 1 in defensive rating since then. No matter how you slice and dice it, it's been impressive. I saw a tweet by Alan Horton, the Timberwolves' fantastic radio voice, and actually one-time host of this podcast going back, I don't know, like 7 years or something like that. Anyway, Alan Horton had a post on X Tuesday morning, where he said Wolves defense since Thanksgiving. So this is since Thanksgiving, which cuts out that 4-game losing streak. I was including the 4-game losing streak because if you do, they're still number 1 in defensive rating since November 18th, exactly 1 month ago. But if you just go since Thanksgiving, not only are they number 1 in defensive rating, but according to Alan Horton's tweet, they're number one in half-court defensive rating. They're number one in transition defensive rating, which is, was phenomenal to see. Now, they were actually, contrary to I don't know, popular belief, but contrary to what you might think, they were a good transition defense last year. 2 years ago, they were miserable. Last year, they were certainly better than that. You have to be number one with the bullet defensively overall, like the Wolves were last year. You have to be solid in transition, and they were. But they're number one in transition since Thanksgiving. Number one in overall opponent effective field goal percentage, which, again, if you're not familiar with that, it factors in, it waits for the fact that 3-point shots are worth more than 2, which is why it's a better measure than just raw field goal percentage. Number one in opponent turnover rate. They're actually forcing opponents to turn the ball over, which they were not doing at all the first few weeks of the season. And last year it was kind of an up and down volatile thing. It is in general, I think, in my opinion, but last season it was not a consistent consistent thing the Wolves could rely on. That wasn't the type of defense they played the last couple of years, but they're doing it over the last 3+ weeks. Since Thanksgiving, they're number one in opponent paint points. They're number one in opponent paint field goal percentage, which, if you want to subscribe to the Rudy hater theory, you would never have guessed that, right? Not that we've heard a lot of Rudy discourse. I don't want to create a complete straw man here, but like Rudy's block percentage is down, right? It's back to where it was a couple of years ago, not what it was last year. But they've got a bunch of guys who are just kind of impacting. Rudy still has the Rudy impact around the paint, even if he's not actively blocking shots. He's being a disruptor. And then you have the length and the athleticism and the activity level of Jaden McDaniels, who's played great the last couple of weeks. Reid, who's been really good defensively for most of this season. Some of these guys that are kind of unsung. Well, Jaden's not an unsung defender, but Nickeil Alexander-Walker, right? The length, the athleticism, the fear of getting your shot swatted by Rudy or Jaden or Naz, or a pass deflected from one of those guys, or Nickeil or Ant or Mike Conley's activity level. Those things impact those paint numbers. And then lastly, they're number one in opponent 3-point percentage and number one in opponent 3-point makes. So they're not only impacting the paint, but they're also impacting the 3-point line, which is, of course, the modern NBA. This shouldn't be a surprise. Like, what do you want to do on offense? You want to get to the rim / free throw line. You want to shoot threes. The Wolves are best in the league since Thanksgiving. We're not talking almost exactly 3 weeks ago in both of those areas defensively. And I go back to activity level, because 3 weeks ago, what were we talking about? This team was not flying around. And we've even seen lapses within this 6 out of 7 win streak, going back to Thanksgiving. That's basically when this started, right? It was the day after Thanksgiving. They won. They beat the Clippers. They've won 6 out of 7 since then. So during that stretch, they've held every opponent except for the game they lost to Golden State at 92 points or fewer. Every opponent to 92 points or fewer. And the way you do that is you lock down the two most profitable areas of the floor. And there's been lapses, certainly the Golden State game. I think even the Lakers game, where things got a bit dicey, early fourth quarter, the third quarter against the Spurs. There's been these lapses where all of a sudden they're not flying around. And it becomes immediately apparent what's changed. It's the activity level. And the scheme hasn't drastically changed. I mean, I think they've been a little bit more flexible. I feel like Rudy's not dropping quite as deep as he had been. And I think the help defense has been better. The low man help's been so much better, which again is activity level. It's not like these guys suddenly remembered how to be the low man. Like, that's not a new concept for the guys on this team. It's the effort level. It's the activity level. It's being in the right place at the right time and being there with urgency. That's changed over the past almost exactly 3 weeks. 3 weeks ago Friday was that win over the Clippers. And now we'll talk about this later in the show. The schedule doesn't get easier. It actually gets a little bit harder over the next couple of weeks. So can they maintain this activity level? That's the next big question. But I thought that tweet from Alan Horton really did a great job of kind of encapsulating everything that I had, I talked around, I guess, yesterday, but I had been including, I thought it was so impressive you include the 4-game losing streak. That's how dominant the defense has been since Thanksgiving. You can include the 4-game losing streak, and it's still unbelievable. And really, that 4-game losing streak, they didn't play all that bad. We're talking a 2-point loss to the Celtics, an overtime loss to the Rockets, two of the best teams in the league, and then, losses to Toronto and Sacramento that were disappointing, but like not shockingly bad, right? But you include those games, and they're still number one in the league going back over a month now in defensive rating. Okay. I want to shift gears a little bit here. Actually, you know what? Let's do the schedule next. Let's do the schedule next because I think that will flow. It's gonna, if you're watching on YouTube, I'm flipping the items on the graphic here. But I think hitting the schedule next makes sense because I want to talk about how this sets up like the challenges the Wolves have upcoming. Then we'll close today's show by talking NBA power rankings and front office rankings, which are in articles that have been out over the last several days. So we'll do all that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at Game Time. Game Time is focused on togetherness this holiday season. That means when you bring people together at live events, the experience is that much better, and it's the perfect gift. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for live events even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Game Time Picks means that there's a curation feature that'll allow it to be easier for you to save more on all your favorite live events, of course, sporting events, but also concerts, comedy, theater, whatever you like to attend. You can find the best deal possible at Game Time, and you can toggle on their all-in pricing feature to allow you to see the total up front with no surprise fees at checkout, and click on the seat views to get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. The Game Time ticket coverage means that your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Holiday season is the best time to get out there and go to a live event with loved ones. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA. That's LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is also brought to us by our friends at Rocket Money. Did Rocket Money help you find any subscriptions you forgot about or that maybe you were paying for twice? That's definitely happened to lots of people I know. You probably have a few subscriptions you don't even realize that you're still paying for. Rocket Money will make it so easy to track them all down. It's like having a personal assistant for your finances. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. It brings everything together in one place, whether it's subscriptions, your spending habits, or even the goals you want to hit this year. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all the app's premium features. One of the best features is the subscription tracker. You can use it to cancel services you might not be using anymore. Plus, you can just save a ton of money by doing that. With their goals feature, you're able to automatically set aside money for your future with no more stressing about budgeting every month. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockdown today. That's rocketmoney.com/lockdown. rocketmoney.com/lockdown. All right, flipping the items there on the rundown on the side of your graphic on YouTube. We're going to hit the Timberwolves' tough schedule next. And I don't want to bury the lead here. Here's what shocked me the most when I was breaking down the Timberwolves' schedule to date. And I mentioned something like this in passing the other day, but I really dug in on this, and I think it's become more stark as some of these bottom feeder teams have continued to separate themselves in a bad way. The Timberwolves are 25 games through the season. So for all intents and purposes, they're nearly a third of the way. Like two games away from being a third of the way. So after they play Golden State, and this will still be true. So get through this weekend. They have the Knicks Thursday, Golden State Saturday. They will be 1/3 of the way through the season, and they will have not played any of the league's worst three teams at all. Two of which are in the Western Conference, which is it's really kind of staggering if you think about it. And I'm not saying they haven't played bad teams. This isn't a complaint. It's a weird kind of quirk in the schedule, how this thing is. Nobody thought the Pelicans would be one of the worst teams in the league. I don't think. I mean, unless you're completely anticipating those injuries, nobody really thought that. But literally a third of the way through the season, the league's three worst teams, the Wizards, Jazz, and Pelicans, have combined for 13 wins among them. That's an average of just over 4 wins per team. So they're a combined 13-63, and the Timberwolves have not accounted for any of those games. It's really incredible. Yeah, they played Portland 3 times. They lost twice. They played Toronto twice. They split those. They beat Charlotte once. And those are the other NBA single-digit win teams. Oh, besides the Sixers, who the Timberwolves have not played yet either. So, like, that's another way you could look at this, is you could look at the NBA's single-digit win teams, and they've only played a total of 6 games among the – is that right? They played Portland 3 times, Toronto twice. That's 5, Charlotte once. Yeah. So of the 7 teams that have single-digit wins a third of the way through the season, the Wolves have played them a combined 6 times. And 3 of them were Portland, and they lost 2 of those games. So I guess maybe we're back to the Wolves from 3 years ago, and maybe this doesn't help them at all anyway, which I guess if that's the case, then we're not talking about a legit finals contender anyway, if they struggle at all with the Wizards, Jazz, and Pelicans. But the fact that we're now a third of the way through the schedule, and the Wolves have not played the 5-20 Jazz, the 5-22 Pelicans, or the 3-21 Wizards is astonishing. Those are the 3 worst teams in the league winning percentage-wise pretty easily. They're also the only 3 teams with a negative double-digit point differential. Portland, by the way, is the other one that's close. The Wolves have lost to them twice. Yes, the Wolves have accounted for 2 of Portland's 8 wins. Anyway, it's crazy. And in case you're wondering when the first time they play one of those teams is, it's still not until after the first of the year. It's not until January 7th. We're still like 2.5 weeks away from the Timberwolves playing one of the league's worst three worst teams. They'll have, what did I say? They're 23 games in currently, so it'll be 25, 30. They'll be 36 games in. Or sorry, 33 games in before they play one of the league's worst 3 teams. So that tells you a couple of things. One, just how difficult the Timberwolves schedule has been to date. It's been a challenge. They played a top 10 hardest schedule in the league. And I would argue it actually probably, I think it's actually been a little bit tougher than even what like the strength of schedule things would show you. And by the way, I've said this, it's been a little while since we talked about this, but like the Wolves' Pythagorean win-loss, which factors in point differential and tells you like, hey, based on your point differential, you should have this record. They should be 16-9. They're actually 14-11 because they've had some bad luck in close games. And obviously there's an execution standpoint to it. The Wolves have to execute to win. I get that. But there's certainly some luck involved. And it's luck that they haven't gotten to this point. So they should be better than point differential than their Pythagorean. And they haven't played the league's 3 worst teams. And yet we're still talking about a team that's now won 6 out of 7, is back to their dominant defensive selves, and we haven't seen anything close to what they can do offensively. But it also, despite all of that, like we just established, they don't play New Orleans until January 7th. They don't play Washington until January 13th. And they don't play Utah, which this is like maybe the weirdest schedule quirk because they're a divisional opponent. They don't play the Utah Jazz for the first time this year until January 30th. Which is crazy. For some reason, that game is a TNT game too, by the way. January 30th. So, what does the next couple of weeks look like? Well, it's not easy. They get the Knicks at home on Thursday, one of the league's 5 or 6 best teams. They get Golden State, who's obviously been struggling. They just traded for Dennis Schroeder. The Wolves just split a pair of games in Golden State, but they get Golden State at home on Saturday. So 2 really difficult games leading into the holidays. At Atlanta on Monday, which is tough because it's sandwiched between these 2, the emotional return of Kat, another Steph Curry game, crazy Target Center Saturday. You go on the road for a 1 at Atlanta before you go to Dallas on Christmas Day. So there's that like floater game in between there against Atlanta that, you really should win. By the way, Atlanta right now is above 500. They're in the 7th spot, the top of the play-in the Eastern Conference if the playoffs were to start today. So they're no slouch this year. They're better than a little bit better than I expected. And then you get Dallas on Christmas Day. Day off in between. Next Friday, you're at Houston. So all of Christmas week, the 23rd to the 27th, you're on a 3-game road trip. Finally return home for Wemby next Sunday, which obviously winnable game, but it's still Wemby. Still a team that's in the mix for the play-in in the Western Conference. Then at Oklahoma City, 2 nights after that, that's a New Year's Eve game. The second best record in the NBA, best team in the West by a solid 3 games is Oklahoma City. First time another divisional opponent the Wolves haven't played to this point. They play them on Christmas Eve. And then you get Boston at home, January 2nd, which is, as tough as it gets. At Detroit. Detroit, by the way, is in position to be, currently they'd be in the last play-in in the East. Obviously a winnable game. You have to go all the way to the New Orleans game on January 7th. There's also a Clippers game in there. You have to get to January 7th again against New Orleans to find a game against a team that's not currently in the play-in. Now, the Pistons are 11-16. Obviously a winnable game. There's a couple other those mixed in, that like, hey, the Wolves should beat the Hawks. They should beat the Spurs. I take that back. The Spurs are actually a game out of the play-in in the West. So I jumped the gun a little bit on that one. All that to say, it doesn't get easier until the second week in January. And then things lighten up a little bit. You get the Clippers at home, then you have to go on the road to see New Orleans. One of the league's worst 3 teams, but second night of a back-to-back on the road. Orlando's been great, even with the injuries they're dealing with. They're at Orlando. Then you get Memphis, who's been great. Then you get Washington, Golden State again, the Knicks again, Cleveland, which is as tough of a 3 game. Oh, and then Memphis, and then Dallas, and then Denver. I mean, talk about tough stretches. Right after that Wizards game, January 15th to 25th, that 10-day stretch, Warriors, Knicks, Cavs, Memphis, Dallas, and Denver. Those are like, what? If you include Golden State in that, that's 6 of the top 8 or 9 teams in the entire NBA consecutively. All that to say, none of these games, you can't mail in any of these. You got to come out and beat the Knicks with 4 days rest on Thursday. You got to come out and win at home against Golden State before you hit the road. And you obviously got to win 2 out of 3 on the road, Atlanta, Dallas, Houston, and that's easier said than done with Dallas and Houston on that road trip. The Wolves have not had scheduled breaks in terms of playing really, really bad teams to this point, which is exciting because it means they should get them. I just thought that was a really weird anomaly at this point in the season, that we're going to be talking well over a third of the way into the season and not having played any of the league's worst 3 teams at all, who they'll get a total of, they'll have 2 against Washington. They'll have 4 against Utah, and I think 4 against New Orleans, but I guess it's possible they only have 3. Let's see. 1, I'm going to count real quick. It might only be 3. So like, we'll split the difference there. We'll say it's 9 total games. They haven't played any of them yet. So that's a positive and will help their second half schedule, their second half record, almost for sure. All right, let's close by talking NBA power rankings and NBA front office rankings. Exciting, interesting articles about, different folks' takes on those things here in recent days. So we'll do all that here next to close the show. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends over at FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with the $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Thursday night football tomorrow night. Chargers at home, favored by 3 points over Denver at Denver's +3. I said this yesterday. I actually kind of feel like that line should be a little closer. I don't mind Denver +3. I like the Broncos. I think there's certainly some areas where the Chargers have an advantage. Like I would still argue quarterback. I would argue, well, certainly not running back. Maybe I guess wide receiver still, the Chargers would have an advantage there, but a good matchup. I don't hate Denver +3 on the road against the Chargers. Again, head to FanDuel.com to join today. Get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is also brought to us by our friends at Built. Today's episode is sponsored by Built Rewards. If you're a renter, listen up. This is a total game changer. Thanks to Built, you can now earn points on rent payments just like you do with groceries or travel. Paying rent now comes with serious perks, and it's completely free to join. Earn valuable Built points on your rent and everyday spending at no extra cost. Redeem points for flights, hotel stays, and even future rent payments. With over 500 airlines and 700,000 hotels in their program, the possibilities are endless. Access unique experiences that are exclusive to Built members. For instance, I love using points for travel. That's a really easy way that you can turn your rent into rewards. If you're already paying rent, why not just make it work for you? Start earning points on rent that you're already paying by going to joinbuilt.com/LockedOnNBA. That's joinbuilt.com/LockedOnNBA. Make sure to use our link so they know that we sent you. Again, it's joinbuilt.com/LockedOnNBA. Don't wait. Start earning rewards today. All right, NBA power rankings. I only put any stock in the NBA.com ones. I actually think today the ESPN one comes out at ESPN ones come out. I think they do it every Wednesday. NBA.com, John Schumann does it every Sunday. We talked about late last week. The Wolves had another big jump in his rankings. I think last week they jumped like 5 or 6 spots. This week they jumped 3 more spots. Minnesota is now ranked number 9, so into the top 10 of John Schumann's NBA.com power rankings. The reason I like them the most is he provides a lot of context, a lot of the same numbers I talk about in the show. He talks about defensive rating, overall net rating, not like crazy stuff, but he actually factors that in, which like ESPN power rankings and some other ones don't. But he also like breaks it down further and talks about the week behind and the week ahead. So like, for instance, he says, obvious, the Wolves have won 6 of their last 7, climbing from 12th to 7th in the West. He says they've climbed from 12th to 4th in defensive efficiency. That's the overall number, right? Overall this year, they're 4th. They're first over the past 6 weeks, like we talked about first segment today. He says they've held their opponents under a point per possession in all 6 wins. That's another way to look at this. 6 out of 7 games, the Wolves have held an opponent to 92 points or fewer. They've held their opponent in their 6 wins over the last 7 games. They've held their opponent under 1 point per possession. That's crazy. He says the Wolves have been playing good teams, but none of the opponents currently rank higher than 14th offensively. Their game against the 3rd-ranked Knicks on Thursday, with Cat making his return to Minnesota, will be a good test. He also says, amazingly, the Wolves rank 27th offensively over the 6-1 stretch, with Nas, Conley, and DiVincenzo all shooting below 40% on at least 45 field goal attempts. That's not 45 threes below 40%. That's field goal attempts, period, which for those 3 is mostly 3s. He says the stifling defense has allowed them to survive some rough shooting nights. They lost their first 8 games this year in which they shot below 37% from 3, but are now 4-0 in those games this month. See, that's the kind of nugget that like you wouldn't get anywhere else. And John Schumann does a great job breaking this down. He then talks about some of the same stuff we covered already today about ranking first in opponent turnover rate, ranking first in opponent effective field goal percentage. And then he talks about the matchup against the Warriors being a significant game because they've split 2 games so far and they have the same record. So we're talking tiebreaker implications in the West. And he talked about how they basically they need to do a better job defensively against Golden State, which kind of goes without saying. But I thought this was a really cool snapshot. And a fair snapshot, a statistical-based snapshot, if you will. And it just kind of underscores what we've been saying. The defense has been so good. And if you listen to Tuesday's show this week, I spent the early part of the show saying, like, hey, look, I actually used these 3 guys as my examples, which I hadn't realized until I pulled this today, pulled up the power rankings today. But Nas, Conley, and DiVincenzo, those 3 guys are all well below what they shot last year. They're all below their career averages, although Nas is closer to his, but Conley and DiVincenzo are very much below what their career averages from 3. It's possible not all 3 of them bounce back to where they were last year or even to their career averages, but at least 2 of them have to, right? Like, there's going to be some progression to the mean in terms of their career 3-point shooting percentages, or at least sniffing what they each shot individually last year. Those things are very possible, if not likely. And if they keep playing defense like they are, that's gonna bode very well for the Wolves. All right, last thing today. The Athletic polled 40 league executives to rank the NBA's front offices, and this was about a week, almost a week ago. I think it was late last week. OKC won going away with 354 points, The Celtics had 250 points, so over 100 points less than OKC. Miami was a distant third with 114. Memphis a distant fourth with 64. The Wolves came in at fifth with 54 points. So we'll call that a not distant fifth, at least when you're comparing it to Memphis at 4. But I mean, like, the Celtics at 2 had 5 times as many points as the Wolves did. It makes sense. We're talking about the 2 best teams in the league. I guess Cleveland's not. Sorry, I should include Cleveland. 2 of the 3 best teams in the league, OKC and Boston. OKC's long been thought to have a really, really strong front office with Sam Presti leading the way. Of course, Brad Stevens and the Celtics always have too. Miami's, been great for 20 years front office wise. I thought it was a little interesting Memphis beat out the Wolves. And I understand why. I'm not going to fight this one. But like, if this vote was taken last year, would they have finished fourth? But if it was taken 3 years ago, they probably would have, because this was on the upswing of John Morant. So it's amazing how quickly that could change. But the way that they rebuilt almost on the fly from grit and grind Grizzlies to the John Morant, Desmond Bane Grizzlies, if you will, is impressive, no doubt. And so I understand why they're there. Tim Conley, of course, has done the Gobert trade and the Cat trade, and like he's taken some swings, the D'Lo Conley trade. But here we are. We're talking about the second winningest coach in Timberwolves history already, who I know was hired by Gerson Rosas, but retained by Tim Connolly. And we're talking about, a conference finals team only the second time in team history. We're talking about Ant being a top 12, top 10 maybe player in the NBA. So, like, obviously a lot has been done in a short period of time for Tim Connolly, as much as it's easy to blame him for stuff. And I didn't like the Cat Randle trade myself. He's phenomenal. And I think arguing for them to be the 4th or 5th best front office is completely warranted. So I thought that was interesting. Go check out that article at The Athletic if you have a moment. All right. That's all we have for you today here on the show. Thursday, I'm hoping we'll have a crossover with Locked On Knicks, working to set that up to get that recorded. We're going to hopefully check in on each other's, the players that were traded to each other's cities, and how Cat's doing in New York. Spoiler, he's been great. And then we'll talk about DiVincenzo and Randle, who have been a bit more roller coastery, we'll call it, in Minnesota. If we don't get Locked On Knicks, I'll do that myself. We'll peek in on Cat. We'll preview the game, of course, against the Knicks on Thursday night. And I'll actually be hosting the live postcast Thursday as well. So following the game, myself, and I'm actually not sure who the guest is. It might be Jack. But on Locked On Sports Minnesota, we'll be live on YouTube to break down Wolves Knicks immediately following. And then, of course, I'll still have the post-game pod here on Friday following the Knicks game Thursday night. All right, that's all we got for you today. Big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on Roku and Amazon Fire TV. Please subscribe to the daily newsletter. We're moving in the right direction subscription-wise, but there's still some small markets that are ahead of us. We are falling a little bit behind from a newsletter standpoint. So if you haven't subscribed, please do me a solid and head on over to LockedOnDaily.com and subscribe to the daily newsletter. It's one stop for ultimate team and league coverage. Gives you a good summary of this podcast every day, plus some great national coverage from some folks over at Locked On. So check that out. LockedOnDaily.com. Start your day with the all-new free Locked On Wolves newsletter. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.